I thought what we would do today is, when it originally launched, was to highlight for companies how they could use their 3D information that they were creating to communicate with customers and doing things like catalogs and web links and things like that. What we found in the last 6 to 8 months or so is a lot of our customers are actually using this tool for internal communications via work instructions or things like training videos. Today we're going to have Darren show you guys a little bit on what that workflow would be within the tool so you have an idea how to create that type of information. But to get us started, I thought what might be very helpful for everybody is if we had an example of one of our customers that have been using this tool, and they could explain to you a little bit on how things were implemented over there, some of the advantages that they had in using this tool over some of the old methodologies in creating these types of animations or presentations. And with that, I'd like to introduce the group from Blackwoods over there in Niles, Michigan. And I think today on the line with us we've got Peggy, Allie, and Nicole.
Yes.
Okay, so you guys, when you originally started, you guys had, if I understood everything correctly, working with some of the people, you were trying to create animations using the SolidWorks tool in order to give a better picture of how to do something, whereas you didn't have to worry about a lot of translations in different languages and be able to paint a clearer picture on how things were supposed to work.
Yes, what we were attempting to do is we had some potential customers for one of our fans in China, and we did have some difficulties with communication, and therefore we wanted to create a video to get all of our information across as to how our fan worked and how it was all put together. I used SolidWorks originally, using animation inside of SolidWorks, and I spent approximately 60 hours putting together a video that was probably less than 4 minutes long, and was, you could see the fan, but I couldn't do a whole lot of detail work with it.
Okay.
From there, we had seen a demonstration of 3D Via, and then we actually purchased the software, and from that we recreated the same video that we wanted to present. It was actually done in approximately 20 hours. It was done by Allie, who is actually one of our document clerks, her and Kolar. They have no SolidWorks background or anything, and they were able to create this in about 20 hours. Ended up with a 7-minute video, and it was very thorough, very detailed, and that so that our customer knew exactly what our fan was.
Okay, so you guys were in essence able to double the length of the video for better visual communication and be able to do it in about 1/3 of the time.
Yes.
Hey, Allie and Nicole, with not having any SolidWorks experience in the past, and I know a lot of customers typically when they add a new software product, the first question is how long is it going to take me to learn this tool, or is it going to be complicated for me to jump into, or especially if you're going to tackle a project right out of the gate, are we going to be able to jump into this thing and still meet deadlines? So, a little bit of feedback from you guys on what was your learning curve with the tool? How do you feel it was as far as getting it implemented and be able to get started using it?
Well, basically, we were able to jump into a small project right away after the 2 classes. We spent 2 full days in training. They showed us the basics of the program, and we were able to put together a short, kind of rough demonstration for internal purposes just to show the new tool. And I think we spent 1 day working on the tool, and by the second project it was looking pretty polished and smooth. So it was basically 2 class days and 1 trial and error sort of presentation. Then we were fairly proficient in it.
Okay, that's great. So from an implementation standpoint over there, being able to interchange information between engineering and then the documentation group, can you guys give us a little insight or a little background on how you guys approach that?
one of the things that we did is we worked together. This video that Allie and Nicole worked on was for our sales department. So basically we sat down, myself as being the designer that created the 3D model, and then the sales department along with Allie and Nicole to determine what kind of sequence and the detailed information that sales wanted. And that, so with the collaboration between all three of the departments, we were able to create what they were looking for.
Okay, good deal. So, and for all our attendees, our original plan is we really wanted to show you some examples because they did a fantastic job on what they were able to present. But between the GoToMeeting and the Windows Media Player, we were having a few glitches this morning. So as far as this presentation today, I can't really show you some of that stuff right now. But we would be happy to give you guys some examples in the future if you guys have any questions, some ideas like that. And then I think you'll be able to see a lot of what the process is and what some of those end results can be based on what Darren's going to show you today. So, you know, I do apologize for that, but again, I think you're going to be able to get a lot of visual information today as well, just based on the presentation of building this stuff together. So, I guess with that, did you guys from Blackwoods, is there any other input or insights you might want to pass along?
We've been very pleased with what the results that we've had, and all of our feedback within our company has been very positive. And we are also looking at future projects that are going to include, we've done some training videos, and then the one for the presentation for a customer, but we're also looking at videos for our service, people that go in to service the fans and stuff. So we've got a lot of stuff coming up that we're going to be using the software for.
Okay. Is it safe to say that once you guys started doing some of this stuff and people internally realized what you could do with this tool, that a lot of brainstorming started happening, a lot of questions started coming up for stuff that you guys weren't doing before?
Oh, definitely. Now that we did some demonstrations at actually a company meeting, and from that we've gotten feedback from a couple of the different departments on some things that they could use that we're going to be creating, and that to help all of their departments, especially sales.
Okay, that's great, and we do hear that a lot with a lot of customers. Typically, it's a group in there trying to get something done a little bit easier. But once people start to realize what they can do with the tool, the creative juices really start to flow. So, good deal. Well, I appreciate you guys giving us a little input to you know, kind of how that went. I think helping people with real-life examples of, you know, how the tool gets done and overcoming some of those concerns initially is beneficial. And I guess with that, Darren, we'll turn it over to you, and so we can get an idea of how we put these things together.
Okay, first thing I want to do is just launch a quick poll. Get a little taste for the audience and what everybody is really most interested in. So if those of you guys out there attending could please go ahead and select one of the three choices here. What is your primary interest in today's presentation? All right, let me just go ahead and close that poll, and I'll broadcast that out for everybody just so you can all see what the results are. Essentially, everybody wants to create documents that are easier to understand, so that definitely makes perfect sense. Streamlining the change process, just a quarter of the attendees are looking at that, but we'll definitely show you what that's going to be all about, because it may be one of those unforeseen things that you do today and you just take for granted how manual it is. And we're really going to kind of open your eyes, I think, on just how automatic these kind of things can be. So next poll I want to use is going to be really to find out what tools you're currently using today and how we can either improve those tools and assist those or potentially replace those with our tool. There are some companies that have purpose-built departments and purpose-built software for these types of purposes. Others we see just use what they have available to them. All right, let me go ahead and close that one and share that with everybody out there. So what I kind of expected, most computers are pretty standard with Microsoft Office products. One person out there with Publisher, or at least a quarter of people out there using Publisher. Publisher is a tool that is not as more commonly used, but is part of Microsoft Office Professional. with either 2007 or the 2010 bundles. So it is a tool that may be available to you. Don't be too intimidated. I'll talk a little bit about that one today as well. And then Microsoft Excel, probably more easy to use, more user-friendly than Word when it comes to laying these things out. But maybe we can go ahead and clear up a little bit of that for you today as well. And I think I've got one more poll that we're going to use here just before we get started. When it comes to the actual imagery creation, is this being created by screenshots from the CAD system or other methods? Or is this actually something that you take physical photographs of the things out on the shop floor? And essentially everybody is unanimous. You're using screenshots for this kind of information. Now, screenshots in the terminology is a print screen of some sort or some sort of capture tool of your computer image. But I really do bundle in digital images with this as well, because they have the same symptom of being a static image. Once it's taken, you really have to take a new one in order to go ahead and replace those. So those are the kind of things that we really wanted to know up front and how this was going to affect everybody. So
I think, Darren, too, this is pretty telling from the standpoint of when you look at the evolution of 3D CAD and how it's being used within companies, people start to see what they could do within that tool, and they start going to the engineering groups and asking for those kinds of screenshots, because that 3D picture does make things clearer when you're trying to communicate with people. And SolidWorks identified that and Dassault and realized that, you know, we have people in engineering that might be doing things that aren't necessarily needed or productive to what they're doing on a daily basis. So in essence, what they've tried to do is create a tool where we could continue to use that 3D information that's being generated, push it out, but get more people involved in who has access to that geometry without actually impacting engineering changes and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Now, some of the things, obviously, that we're asking for are loaded questions. The reason I'm saying that is because of the samples that we've received from some of our customers and how they're doing things today. This is a typical Excel format layout. We've got some nice information up at the top that needs to be documented when it comes to the job numbers and who's involved. But down here we see the typical input, basic text that's related to some image. And to me, the biggest, I won't call this a bad document because it serves its purpose, but the biggest problem with the document, especially in this situation, is that real parts have to exist in order for a document like this to be generated. Real things are manufactured. A person is standing there taking pictures of another person physically assembling these. And what this does is it works for products that will never change, but if the part changes even one component in these views, new parts have to be manufactured, new pictures have to be taken, and new documentation has to be kicked out. And that's a very, very detailed and very tedious process, especially to keep things up to date. So we'll come back to this one in a moment, but this is exactly what we see out there in industry pretty constantly. So let me move over to Composer now for a moment. Today what we're going to be doing is actually dealing with these Jaws of Life files. And the company that provided us with these is Homatro, and it's actually a SolidWorks customer that provided us the CAD data. I can actually show you that we do have the SolidWorks data open in a separate window as well. We'll come back to this in just a couple of moments. But essentially what we're dealing with is data imported from a CAD system. And I'm not going to say SolidWorks specifically, because with Composer, we're basically a CAD neutral tool. When you say file open, you can go ahead and open up natively things like CATIA V4 and V5 models, Pro Engineer part and assembly and export models, as well as the SolidWorks parts and assemblies. And then neutral files like IGES and STEP, which will give us options from pretty much every other CAD product that's out there. We read the CAD data directly, and there's a lot of data that comes along with it, not just the geometry that you see here, but also what's called the metadata. Not only that, but also the subassembly structuring comes in automatically. So how these parts are nested, subassemblies that have parts within those, all of that's fully maintained, along with the document's names. Quantities are automatically maintained, as well as that metadata, which would be properties that our SolidWorks users commonly put into their files, like descriptions, cost information, mass properties, ownership and state, whether you're using data management. So those kind of things are easy to leverage by just simply saying file open and grabbing the CAD document directly. Now with this document, we have all of the properties that were associated even visually. So the colors are maintained, and a bunch of those types of features are standard parts of what comes across. When we take these files in, we obviously have the opportunity to rotate them around and zoom in and make other views that are more important to the documentation process. The idea behind this tool, simply put, is to allow the documentation people to do their job unobstructed and allow the CAD people to continue to do their job, instead of having to have a documentation person have to get a hold of a CAD person to get these images, to make exploded views, and to create the types of things that are needed for documentation or animations downstream. So we separate those two lines. Now the product itself here was made to be easy enough that you didn't have to have CAD knowledge. In fact, sometimes the CAD knowledge actually is a hindrance because you're trying to do the things the same way you do in the CAD system. And it was made much easier here in Composer. I've got a tab up here that actually shows a bunch of views that I've created. And I can go to each of those views with a simple double click. I can also grab those views and drop them into the window, and it will transition over to those additional positions. One of the things that you see right away here is that above and beyond what even a CAD system could do, we can add things like annotations, these arrows, notes, and other things that are very descriptive and important about exactly what's taking place with this assembly. It's very easy to see the transitions from one view to another, and things tend to animate to actually show you how these positional changes take place. So what I want to do is just go ahead and show you how these views get created, because these are what we leverage to actually make the downstream documentation. I'm going to take an original view up here. We're just going to copy and paste that view for a moment. So down here at the bottom, what I want to do is make some changes. And in Composer, we use standard Windows functionality. Slow double clicks allow me to rename files. I'm going to call this one Remove Battery. And we're going to make a simple procedure here on how the battery comes out of the handle of this device. So using simple middle mouse button techniques to rotate and translate, zoom in and out, we can go ahead and move these parts into a proper position based on the paper size that you see here. And that's the layout or this border that you actually see through the imagery. To actually make an exploded view or to pull parts out of this, we just use some simple transform techniques: translation, rotation, and explode tools if applicable. Works very, very simply, where all I have to do is go ahead and select either one, or using my control key, multiple components. And that's just a basic pick and drag on the triad. Select the parts, and you can put these to a numerical distance, but really the idea here is that we're trying to paint a proper picture, so we just need the spacing to be something that's appropriate. So the CAD data is here, and obviously that's very easy to use. But where the emphasis really comes in is the ability to go ahead and author things like arrows, whether it be a linear or circular 3D arrow, adding in notes or other image panels, and even paths when we explode these to see what the dashed line locations of the explode component happens to be. To add in these types of annotations, it's very, very easy to do. What we're going to do with this is actually just go ahead and select on one of the components, because the tool itself snaps directly to the CAD geometry. So to position this arrow, I'm just going to click on one of the screws and then click a second time to determine the length, which will be more over here towards the handle. We'll do this a second time. Click on my screw. Go ahead and click to determine the length. Now everything that we do in Composer is based on properties, whether it's the color or position of a part, visual properties, opacities, or any of the other things that we see here when it controls the size and position of these arrows. By selecting more than one, which again I'm using my control key, I can easily go ahead and modify the opacity of both of these arrows by simply dragging the slider in the properties tree. Anything that I do here is affecting what's on screen. Another nifty little setting for these types of annotations is this stay on top option. By deselecting that, what you'll notice is the arrows now go through the holes in which they automatically snap to with the axis of those screws, and it sits beneath the parts and really shows this visually and very appropriately. Now the arrows can be moved using the same transform tools that we were using for the geometry. So if I want to reposition those slightly, I can simply pull those out and again really make this picture look exactly the way I want it to look. When all is said and done, a simple right click on this view allows me to update, and now my snapshot is going to be maintained. So now if at any point I wanted to go from one view to the next, I can go back to a previous view indicating how these jaws get removed, and then I can simply go ahead and move over to my battery removal view, and you'll see how it actually transitions and shows the tweening or the animations between the previous selected view and the view that I've just created. basically, I'm really getting interested in how the consumption of this document takes place, or how you use these. So in other words, what are the repetitive tasks that really could be improved and could eliminate some of that extra stuff that just saps the hours and minutes out of the day? We'll close that out, and it's pretty clear across the board here. We've got an equal separation between creating screenshots and views, creating them again and again, which is always a big deal. Anytime you recreate, that's an issue. And then those views for the animations. And really what I want to emphasize on this, and I'm glad to see what these are indicating, is that creation is easy. Even in a CAD system like SolidWorks, the first time you do it, if we knew the final design, it would be easy. But designs change and evolve constantly, could be by the minute. And the changes and the redos are the things that are absolutely the time killers, the things that really just sap the life out of a day. So this is a good thing to see here, because that's really what we're going to go ahead and address with these next couple of examples here. What I'm going to do is take the images that we've got here, all of these views, all these different snapshots that are available, and we're going to save them out to a consumable document. 3D Via Composer has a series of workshops, and those are useful for creating bills of materials and animations with the video. We can also create a couple of very dynamic image types. I'll call them categories because there's multiple file types in each. But you have technical illustration, which is a scalable vector graphics image. And what that amounts to is an image that can be saved as any size, because as it scales up and down, it's based on vectors, not pixels. And what that simply means is you could rescale it without losing the resolution and without it getting very pixelated or very blocky. Now, high-resolution images are pixel-based images. However, you've got capabilities for actually saving these images up to 8,000 pixels by 8,000 pixels, which is an extremely large, extremely high-quality image. If you know the file size, that's great. You go ahead and simply type in the width in pixels, the DPI, and the physical image size that you want to use. Now, I have a series of different profiles. You can save profiles that are going to actually retain the settings down here. So the next time you want to use the same sizes, you don't have to reset these things or make notes as to what those values should be. By simply hitting my pull down, I can switch to my cover image, which is going to be a 1950 by 2550. Different size paper. You can see that my actual paper border did change on that one. So I have a series of those in here that I don't have to recreate the wheel or memorize my settings when I want to use those. Some things that could be done on here were anti-aliasing, which takes lines that are on angles that tend to have a stepped look to them based on the way pixels appear on a screen. You can get rid of some of that by really smoothing those edges. Making a white background automatically. Maybe I don't have a white background as I'm creating these, but in my imagery I really don't need to see this gradient. So some neat little settings for that. To create these images, it couldn't be easier. You simply hit Save As. Now what we're going to do on this one is save it as a JPEG, but you do have options for TIFF and PNG as well as bitmap, but those are usually pretty heavy file size. We've got better options than those. And all we're going to do is go ahead and save every single one of these images out as a brand new file. So it's going to ask if I want to replace these, and of course I do. Well, now these images are saved in some location. Happens to be on my C drive right now, but it doesn't really matter where those happen to be placed. And I want to cover a little bit about how these images are used downstream. Now I've got a few examples of how I actually might want to do this. We've got a lot of products that are used by our customers to lay these out. Adobe Illustrator, Adobe InDesign, Word, Publisher, Excel. There's a lot of different ways that it can be done. So I'm just going to give you a couple of brief examples of how this might take place. Inside of Illustrator, what I would do is simply say File, Place. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and browse to that same location, which I'm already at, and I can simply select, and in this case, link to the image location. That case, if the image does change, my document's going to change. Very simple. What that will do is place the image on my screen, which I can easily resize to scale by using the Shift key, which is very common with most systems, and simply place that wherever it's appropriate. Now, just for effect on this one, I've got a bunch of captions that I've actually saved. I'm just going to turn on each of those layers. And those captions will just serve for giving this thing a nice little outline or realistic format for where things are positioned. So we'll be a little bit repetitive here. I'm just going to go ahead and place additional views. We'll keep hitting place. I will keep resizing these. And I can make these a very specific size, but for the interest of time here in the demo, let me just go ahead and click each of these in very quickly. If I was to have saved these out to the exact size that I wanted, they would fit perfectly. But it's always better to save it larger than smaller, because when you try to make a small image larger, that's when it gets pixelated. You try to take an image like this, scale it down. The systems these days are pretty good at keeping the resolution intact on each of those images. So that's a basic way that I might use or consume these images downstream in something like Illustrator. Now I'm going to move over to Microsoft Word. In Word, I already have a few of these being used, so we'll kind of move a little bit forward on this one. And again, not to be repetitive, I'll just do this very briefly. But Word is very simple and has actually gotten a lot higher quality with the system than it did before, with how image placement happens with dialogues and text wrapping and captions. So inside of Word, what I'm just going to do is simply hit Insert Picture. Now with this, the methodology is actually this. And it's changed from version to version, but in this particular version, it's a pretty easy thing to do. What I want to do is locate my Remove Battery view. And what you have to do inside of Word, and this happens to be Word 2010, Word 2007 is exactly the same as far as I remember there. Instead of just doing an insert down here, you can actually hit this pull-down menu and say Link to File, or Insert and Link, which is what I'm going to do here. And what that'll do is actually put the image in place and create a link to the live version where it happens to be on my C drive. The other thing that's changed a little bit with Word these days is that when I resize my documents and put them in different positions, all you have to do is right-click on this image and go down to Wrap Text. And this will allow you to, instead of treating it like it's text itself, actually allow text to move around it. Where if I do the square wrapping or if I do a simple tight wrapping, I can move this image to wherever it makes sense on my document, and then it will simply wrap the text around that. So Word used to be quite difficult back in the day. I think it's improved significantly, and it really allows for this dynamic change for placing these files. Again, if it's what you have, you're used to it, you probably know the best way to put these things in position. Okay, this is great. Our documents are done. But the problem is the CAD guys are still working on them. And I say it's a problem, but with Composer, it's actually built to address that particular situation of workflow. With Composer, instead of actually having to finish your design and then do your documentation, what we can do with this is actually create the documentation in parallel with the design. And if a change takes place, the change can be assimilated all the way through the process very easily. Now if we take a look at my assembly here, I'm going to go back to my original view. What's going to happen on this is a design change is going to take place. And more specifically, we're actually going to change this bent tubing handle to something that's a little bit more of a machined and welded design. Now there's two ways to do this inside Composer. If I'm a documentation person and I don't know what the guy has changed in the assembly, I just know it has changed, we can simply go to File, Update, and then update the entire Composer document. All we have to do is browse to the CAD assembly, and it'll take care of the rest. If I specifically know the change that needs to take place, I can actually be very deliberate and pick the exact part itself, which in this case is going to be this bent handle. And I'm just going to simply say Update. When we choose the new CAD data, move this off to the side a little bit so you can see this. Pay attention more in this area because that's going to be the definite change of the geometry. When I click Update, you'll actually see that everything here updates to that brand new CAD file. Not just here, but every single view that I generated previous to that. So if I move over to the one where the jaws are open, or I move to the battery removal, we'll zoom out just a little bit here so you can actually see right down there is the brand new CAD data. So it's extremely easy to have these types of changes translate across the system itself. Now that said, we've now got a dynamic change that's been made to our Composer document. All I really have to do is go back now to my workshop. We're going to hit our high resolution image, and using the same settings, I'm just going to go ahead and save every single view over again. So we'll do the same save as, we'll go ahead and kick out brand new JPEGs and replace them all. Depending on the publishing tool, it's a little bit different in how these changes are assimilated. If we go over to Word, for example, you'll actually notice that on screen here, if I can get a view that really shows this well, this is still the old version of this. Now Word has an image manager. I use that term loosely, but it does have an image manager of sorts, where if I go to File, there's an option in Word 2010 that says Edit Links to Files. If you're in Word 2007, you've actually got to go down to Prepare, which is down in this menu, and then there'll be an option for edit links to files. But this gives you the capability to actually take all of these images that are currently linked to, and again they're on my C drive, and I could go ahead and globally select those and simply hit Update Now. So that's one method that could be used. Another method, and I'll just do this in a very easy manner, we'll use this image here because you can see the handle pretty well, is I'm actually just going to go ahead and close this file for a second. We're not going to save it. I probably should save it because that was going to have my other image in it. Oh well. Then we'll say File Open. And what you'll notice is that all of the images have actually updated to the new images they're linked to. So right there we can see that handle quite plainly. Except for the fact that I didn't save the document, which means my battery image is no longer there, so I would have to simply insert that again. But yeah, that's my own fault. No big deal. I'll even do the insert and link one more time. Word is not necessarily purpose-built for this type of a thing here. I mean, it's there for word processing, but the OLE stuff has really only gotten good in the last few releases. Products like Illustrator, on the other hand, are purpose-built for this exact task. And when I go ahead and click on my Illustrator file, which is currently open, what I actually get is a box that pops up right here in the middle that says, some files are missing or modified in the links panel. Would you like to update them now? Now, visually, let me just try and minimize things so you can actually see that document before I click OK. Sorry, things like to pop behind. There we go. And now you can see visually that we have the old version of that handle in these three images. And when I click yes, it simply updates every single one of those. So the consuming tool, the tool that actually does the publishing, has their own methodologies for these changes, but all of them are based on the common principle of linked to a file. And if that file changes, there's a mechanism to download and update the actual documentation. So what that simply means as a result is we've now got static documentation that is, in effect, a dynamic link back to those images. And without more than just a few clicks, we have updated from the CAD tool straight through the publishing tool with all the intermediates creating the consumable images. We're really just talking more about the static documentation and consumables today. But just to kind of close the loop on one of these other things we were talking about, I'm going to go back to that Excel document for a moment, back to one of our customers. And what we see here again is that static imagery, which once again could have been updated through a very similar methodology using this Office document and link to files. However, what we did with this customer was a little bit different. Tools like Office have capability called object linking and embedding, which goes along with static images, but it also goes along with other programs. And I've got a second version of this that I created for them, which if I actually move over to the different Excel spreadsheet, you'll see the same input here at the top. We see the people that are involved, the dates issued, various numbers, and the same text-based work instructions. However, what I did in this is I simply went to my Developer tab inside of my Office tool. And with the Developers tab, what you could do is simply say Insert, More Controls. We've got a control here called 3D Via Player. Now that circumvents all the necessity to create static views, because essentially what we've got now is the Composer document itself embedded directly into Excel, which means inside my Excel spreadsheet I have capabilities of rotating, zooming, panning. I can even come up in here and grab other rendering tools and change the visibility if I choose. But I can also just play from one view to the next to see exactly how this takes place. So in this case, if I go ahead and play the animation that's embedded into Excel, the ambiguity that happens with static types of assembly documents can really be removed very, very easily by simply having animations based on these views instead of just one static view followed by the next. I'm trying to let that play through a few times so that the users on the other end can see all of this. That looks pretty good. And then, of course, those recipients can also simply activate the view. Now, some things that we didn't really cover in this particular session were transitions from one view to the next. And built into this interface, you can have buttons that say Next Step or Previous Step. And by clicking those, it will actually rerun the previous animation steps or simply move on to the next step. But there's a new initiative these days where we're talking about, or we're seeing more and more of this dynamic usage and consumption of documents downstream. the main thing that I've got is a little presentation or a little website that actually shows how this is being consumed by using a simple iPhone. Yeah,
and
well,
Darren, before we move on to that one, can you give them a view of that set screw? Because I think that's a subtlety in this one that we did, or you did for them, that I think is important to point out of what kind of power this tool can give you in advance.
Certainly, and we pared down the animation up here, the full-blown animation at the request of the customer to not show too much. But when it comes to the views that I have, adding of annotations is, to me, a very key thing, because we can't necessarily eliminate text altogether, but the less text there is, the less translation there is, which is a cost issue, and the less ambiguity there is for people who aren't that savvy at assimilating what they're reading. And as we move from view to view, there's even things that are really ambiguous. I read this document half a dozen times before I really understood exactly what they were trying to do. And it had to do with the assembly of this section of the assembly down into the receiver tube. And as that assembly gets put together, there's a mechanism that stops this from flying apart. So as I transition from one view to the next, it's easy to see the retainer plates go into place. But where it got a little bit confusing had to do with how this thing gets retained. So here's our fasteners, and those are in place. But their directions called for the insertion of set screws, or stop screws, but they're set screws in this case. And when you install the set screw, the instructions said to bottom them out. So, okay, well, bottoming the set screw out is okay, but that actually binds up the entire assembly. The other part of this was actually to back it out a quarter of a turn. I'm going to see if this shows good over the webinar. Yep, backs out nicely. Well, why do you back out a quarter of a turn? By inserting simple section views, we can see exactly what the issue is. And in this case, I've cut the tubing without cutting the stop screw or the actual tube that's going to move, to show you that there's a little bit of a lip overlap that takes place between where this set screw actually goes in and how it can still allow for movement but still hit the stop plate properly. And things
Which
like this.
ideally is something that if they wanted to do out there on the shop floor, they would have had to create 2 of these tubes and spend a whole lot of time cutting stuff. So we're talking wasted scrap.
Oh, yeah.
Just to be able to highlight some of this stuff that you could do with a simple section view.
Yep. There's definitely a cutoff wheel involved in the real life scenario here. And a lot of chips. So it's a big deal. It really does clear up a lot of those things that, if we can clear anything up that's going to stop a part from being mismanufactured or misassembled, that's worth all the money in the world. And it really just assists directly from the CAD system to that. The beauty, again, and I hope everybody is getting the relevance of this, is that no parts really had to even exist before this design was verified right from CAD down to documentation. We see a lot of people that have pay withheld because they don't send their assemblies with full documentation. And frankly, the longer that money sits out there, the least likely you are to actually collect it. So if we can ship the documentation directly with your assemblies or your products, or especially with consumer goods, it's not going on the shelf at Home Depot until there's a user guide in that box. We need to close the gap from design to manufacturing to documentation. And this tool is purpose-built for that.
Share another quick story with you. We've got another group that deals in a lot of aftermarket OEM type parts. And one of the things that they were slated to do was when they create these new parts, they have to explain to the dealerships how these parts get installed. And they would always end up with a bunch of different CAD models based on the fact that since they were aftermarket parts, they could be used on different OEM vehicles. But in training everybody, not only having those different CAD views for the different types of vehicles proved to be a problem in managing and dealing with them all the time. But just in general, the communication going out to the dealerships needed to be clear. So what they've done is actually utilize the tool to create training AVIs that they can send out to the dealerships based on the parts. So when the mechanics and stuff get these, all they have to do is fire it up on the computer, and they can go through the step-by-step instructions until they're comfortable being able to do these installation processes.
But one other thing that I will go ahead and bring up is another consumption downstream of those scalable vector graphics files that I was talking about before. Basically, you have ways of being actually able to interact with these files. And these scalable vector graphics files, if you go ahead and open those, actually open up directly in a web browser. And the beauty here is that they're a very dynamic image. Though static, can be linked from one file to the other. And it's a simple file save as, just like the raster-based images that we just had. But what this gives you on a web page here is automatic interactivity. If somebody selects on the bill of materials, they'll actually see a component highlight over in the graphics area. You select either the balloon or the geometry of a part inside the graphics area, you'll actually see all those components highlight. There happens to be 4 of these features. And then you can also build in hyperlinks that take us to those subassemblies. So if I click on this body, it actually goes to a different SVG file and allows me to drill down a little bit deeper into this and even further into the disassembly of this handle. And what this has proved to us is that although customers are savvy in using a product, when things break, it's not always that easy to describe to a service technician what parts need to be replaced. So if somebody's holding a part in their hand that's broken, they can easily navigate through a website, find out exactly what the number happens to be, and easily order a replacement part using this graphically interactive method instead of trying to see through the eyes of the blind and describe something that they're not as familiar with as the person on the phone they're trying to describe it to. So another static method being able to consume these files downstream. So anything else that you wanted to add to this, Brian?
No, I think that's about it. If any of the attendees have any questions over on your GoToMeeting view, you can feel free to ask any questions that you may have that we can touch on before we end today.
Actually got one question just popping up here. The question is, how long has 3D Via Composer been out?
The tool has been out for roughly 2 years now within the SolidWorks chain. I think a little sooner than that via some of the other Dassault channels. But
yeah, and first time I saw it, Brian, was actually got trained on it in San Diego in 2008. So that was February 2008. So about 2.5 years for the SolidWorks people. But as Samaj, which is the previous name of the company, it was out for a good 8 years before that, I believe. It was a French company originally.
Yeah, and they had a lot of success in Europe, and part of the goal was because it was a new product, something that really wasn't mainstream at that point, the goal was to bring that in because it fit into our customer base very well since we're 3D users, and wanted to be able to mature this product. So over the last year, Darren, I think, what are we averaging? We do 2 main updates a year with this tool.
Now that this product has been brought in under the Dassault umbrella, they are also doing 2 releases a year. So we are currently looking at the 2011 version, which I've been on since about April or so, March or April. And we should see a 2011X version coming up shortly, and then 2012 quickly after that. So the development on this is very feverish. We got a lot of enhancement requests coming in from existing customers and prospects that are being dealt with very rapidly.
All right. Well, as Darren said, you guys can always reach out to us over at the SI if you have any further questions that we can answer for you, or something that you think of on the way out. And I want to thank again the ladies from Niles, Michigan over there at Flatwoods for sharing their story with us, letting us know how things were implemented over there. So I think, again, it's always beneficial to hear on how real-life stories on how customers are handling this.
We hope we can help you with some more information, and if you want to dive a little bit deeper beyond just the static imagery usage of this, please get a hold of us, and we can set up an on-site demonstration and go a little bit more personalized towards your particular tasks.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Take care.